Pancho Villa. Who's Pancho Villa? Vida. Un corrido, okay. Let's see. Here's a song that's kind of interesting because the song does talk about Pancho Villa, but it's not necessarily about Pancho Villa. I'll tell you the story after.
Not the story.
Fui soldado de Francisco Villa, que en un tiempo llegó a ser mayor. Y aunque estuvo sentado en la silla, oye, canto yo esta canción. Ay, 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 ay. Fui sentado de Francisco Villa, que tanto ha luchado por esta nación. Yo fui uno de aquellos dorados que en un tiempo llegó a ser mayor. Y aunque a veces te vi derrotado por la fuerza de Almano Obregón, ay, 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 siempre anduve como fiel soldado que tanto ha luchado al pie del cañón. Mi caballo que tanto montaba, en Jiménez su vida entregó. Una bala que a mí me tocaba, a su cuerpo lo atravesó. Ay, 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 ay. Al morir de dolor relinchaba, cuánto le lloraba cuando se murió. Al morir de dolor relinchaba, cuánto le lloraba cuando se murió. Was written for the horse, not necessarily for Pancho Villa, although it's mentioned in the song. At the end, it says, my caballo que tanto dorado es so it's a possibility. And I'll thank you, and I'll come back after we listen to this talented and beautiful co-presenters. Okay?
Hi, I'm back. Did everybody get some chili, some pozole, some cookies? There's so much food in there. Please have more. I wanted to thank our sponsors for this evening. Becky Lenzini from Nighthawk Press is one of our sponsors. Taos Community Foundation. New Mexico Arts. The Virginia Wellington Cabot Foundation. And the National Endowment for the Humanities. So, thank you so much to those sponsors. It's so helpful to a nonprofit. Our MC for the evening, oh, you know what? I I should introduce volunteers and board members because we really could not have done this without them. So I jotted down everybody's name, and then I shuffled my papers. So at the door, we have Sarah Stitt, who's one of our very good volunteers. Carrie Nassif is here this evening, and Carrie always volunteers. She's at the back. She's absolutely wonderful. Lauren Bjorkman, without whom we would not have had a chili dinner because 11 bags of chili were frozen like rocks when we got here a couple of hours ago. And Lauren made it her mission to thaw those things. Former board member Maria Garcia is our Pozole chef. Miles Kimber, one of our many volunteers who helped set up chairs. We have Harlan Hessen, who's here with our sound system, his sound system. And Mike Tilley from Cultural Energy is recording this evening. So and Lisa Garcia, Vice President of our board, is here to help as well. So our MC now for tonight is Cisco Guevara. He's a legendary New Mexico river guide, storyteller, and conservationist. He's recognized by his distinctive black cowboy hat, which he is indeed wearing this evening. Longtime Taos resident, he founded Los Rios River Runners, which is the state's first commercial rafting company and also the most experienced rafting company. And he co-founded Amigos Bravos, which is a water protection movement group. And as we all know, water protection is crucial here. With over 50 years of experience, he provides whitewater adventures. He shares engaging stories of New Mexico's history. He shares folklore, and he advocates for the environment. And we are so pleased to welcome Cisco to this event. Thank you so much.
Cisco, we forgot to say right here. One of the co-founders of
That's right, Help a Community Center. A lot of good people here, and what a wonderful place and energy that this has developed into over the years. I'm so proud of this community. We're an example for the rest of Taos and the rest of New Mexico. Good evening, everybody. My name is Francisco Antonio Miguel Niño de Ortiz Ladrón de Guevara de Garcia Núñez. That's why they call me Cisco. Thank you for participating in the SOMOS Storytelling Festival and getting me out of the house. I appreciate you. I'm the MC tonight, as I said, so I'm allowed to tell you one quick story. So here we go. See if I can think of one. Well, let me do a little explanation first. You know, when the Storytelling Festival first started 27 years ago, I believe it was, the ladies from SOMOS came to me and said, Cisco, we're starting a Storytelling Festival. We want you to come tell a story. And I said, oh, ladies, I'm so honored, but I'm not a storyteller. I'm a raft guide. And they said, Cisco, we've been on your raft trips. You're a storyteller. So I remember they got me up on the stage there that first year, 27 years ago. And you know, one of the biggest fears human beings can have is fear of public speaking. And I got it bad. I was scared. I was nervous. So I went to the ladies of SOMOS and I told them, I'm so nervous. I'm so scared. I don't know what to tell. And they said, Cisco, it's easy. Just tell your most memorable days on the river. Oh, that is easy. That's all those days I found dead bodies down there. So I soon got a reputation, well-deserved, for telling these really gross, horrible stories. And they realized that I needed help. So as the Storytelling Festival grew in success and they were able to hire the true professional national acts that mostly come out of the International Storytelling Festival out of Jonesboro, Tennessee, they mentored me, and I've made good friends with those people and watched their careers take off. Some of them now have TV shows. And they said, Cisco, You're what's known as an intuitive storyteller. In other words, I can't memorize anything, but because of my deep connection to my culture, to the history, to the wild place I make my living, there's all sorts of stories that will come out. So here comes one. You know, when you're a certain age, like 14, 15, 16 years old, I think a lot of people go through this. You're searching for, who you're going to be, and you really, really want to be cool, because that's your main purpose in life, is to have other people think you're cool. And so I was not an academic, and I wasn't a very good athlete, so there wasn't very much I could accomplish to gain some notoriety and be thought of as cool. But me and my friends did think of one thing. Nobody had ever walked from where we lived to Puye, an ancient native Indian village. It was 10 miles away. It was rough country hiking there. And so we challenged ourselves to do that in one day. Never been done before, and if we could accomplish it, we would be cool. So we started off, and sure enough, we failed, and I realized, you know what? My buddies are slowing me down. I'm going to leave them behind. And I left super early. Like the stars were still out in the night sky when I left the house. And I walked across the mesa and down a steep cliff, across a sandy arroyo, up another cliff, across the mesa, down, across, and up. And every time I crossed and went down a cliff, I encountered ancient Indian cave dwellings from the ancient people. And when you got to the top of the next mesa, there was old villages. And every time you went to the next mesa, it was older and older villages, older cave dwellings, older villages on top. It was like walking through time. It was really a magical, wonderful experience. And I walked all day long, and I finally made it to Puye. And I was exhausted, and the sun was going down. And I found a clearing, a grassy clearing that was surrounded by big, tall ponderosa pine trees. And I leaned up against one of them, and I fell asleep. I passed out. I woke up sometime later, and it was dark. There was no moon out. It was just starlight. And as my eyes got adjusted to the dark, all of a sudden I realized there were dozens and dozens of little red beady eyes just a little ways off the ground staring at me. Oh my God, spirits, gremlins. Maybe they're mad at me for making this hike. I'm not sure. And then as my eyes adjusted to that starlight, I realized it's rabbits. Dozens and dozens of rabbits. And they were looking at me, trying to figure out what I was doing. That went on for a while. And then all of a sudden, on cue, every single individual rabbit, and there's dozens and dozens of them, stood up on their hind legs and started dancing. And they danced for several minutes. It went on and on. And when I told my Native American Indian friends from Santa Clara, Capo, what had happened, they said, Cisco, you know what Puye means, don't you? I said, no, I don't. He said, it means sacred gathering of rabbits. Dude, you were there. They honored you. They blessed you. You are cool. So now you know. Okay, I'm honored to be able to introduce our next storyteller, Celinda Reynolds Kalin. Celinda Reynolds Kalin is a poet, author, lecturer, and ethnohistorian who is privileged to work and study with Indigenous elders and spiritual leaders from over 70 First Nations. She is a member of the World Council of Elders and has traveled extensively with those traditional spiritual elders, performing earth healing ceremonies in North and South America. Kalin is adjunct professor at Colorado College and is the author of 6 books, including Journey Song, A Spiritual Legacy of the American Indian, 4 Directions, 1998, Pikes Peak Backcountry, American Indians of Pikes Peak Region, and Ute Legends. Celinda is a Cherokee grandmother who has dedicated her life to the healing of the sacred hoop and follows the Lakota spiritual traditions as a pipe carrier and a sun dancer. She has completed 15 Sundances with the Lakota. She is proud to be an adopted member of both the Lakota Nation and the Ute Nation. So there you go.
I'm going to add another name to Cisco's name, and I'm going to put Don in front of it because he's such a gentleman. I was late. Had a number of neighbors that have emergencies, and I'm trying to help them and rushing around, so I apologize walking in on this beautiful music. And Don promised me that he would tell a story long enough that I could gobble down some food. So thank you, Don Cisco. And thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. My biography tells you a great deal about me. And so what I'll do, I want to share this evening as an adopted member of the Ute Nation. I worked extensively as an assistant to the Ute shaman, to a Ute medicine man. And that's how I became involved in the World Council of Elders. I only found out a few years ago when my daughter did my DNA. She was doing genealogy, because I explained to the audience, the people earlier, that I didn't know my mom, really. I only knew her for the first 6 years of my life. And at that time, we had a terrible flood. We had a home near Isleta, lost everything. We were farmed out to friends and neighbors, and I went to a neighboring farm for the next 4 years with my little brother and lived with them. And we got back home 4 years later, and then we lost that home to a fire. And so then I was farmed out to friends again. I can't remember where I went at that time. And then we got back together a little later, I don't know, 6 months or a year. And then my mother got a brain tumor, inoperable, and was in a coma for 2 years and then died. So I only had that short time with her, really my first 6 years. So I didn't know my mother. So when my daughter did my DNA and our genealogy, she said, "Mom, do you know you're Cherokee?" And I go, "What?" She says, "Your grandfather's full-blooded Cherokee." And I go, "Wow. Do you have anything about the family?" And she's, "Yeah, you've got about a dozen cousins on the Cherokee reservation." So so my husband and I went there, and I thought, "Oh boy, I'm going to meet some of Mom's family," finally. And but I got there, and they won't give you any information. All I had was a name, and I wasn't allowed to have any other information unless you're an enrolled tribal member. And so we had to come back home, and I didn't get to meet any of my cousins. So I was pretty devastated. That was heartbreaking for me. So when I get the courage up again, I cried for 3 days. So I'm not willing to go back there again and try that. I'll have to get a little stronger, a little braver. So I've been delving deeply into my Cherokee ethnography and the history, just to learn, to bring me closer to my mom. But I'm not going to share any of those legends tonight. The one I want to share, because we're sort of short on time, is my Ute sister. We Sundanced together for 15 years, Loya, and she was respected. She was Colorose, a famous Comanche chief, his granddaughter, and a dear friend. And we Sundanced up on Pine Ridge with the Lakota, because the Ute don't let women Sundance. And so we were Sundancing up there, and we did that always for the children, because we knew these hard times were coming that we're seeing now. And we wanted to be sure that the children were going to be okay and taken care of. That was our intention. But she and I had so much fun together. And one of the things that we did, and all the legends I collected in my ethnographic work from the Ute and from the medicine man that I worked with, one of our favorite legends was about Toad and Frog. And Loya and I would give talks, and we'd act this out together. That's the way you do in traditional Ute storytelling. The elders would tell it in the wintertime, and the children would sit around, and you'd tell the story 4 nights in a row, and then you'd make the children repeat it back verbatim, each one of the children. And of course, that's a great peer review, because you know how it is when you're kids. They go, That's not how it went, you know. So these little kids, that's how they learned, and that's why there's so much integrity in these legends. And the Ute legends that I collected, I wanted to show that integrity. And what hooked me was one of the legends about rabbit killing the sun, and I found the identical legend in the Mayan from 400 AD. So this is a legend that's been handed down through many cultures, because they're all related. It's all part of that Aztec Tanoan culture language group, but then handed down for thousands of years. And that's how the integrity of these oral traditions is established, is with that kind of a process. So this legend that Loy and I love to tell for the children, and it was about Toad and Frog. So Toad and Frog were best friends, and Toad lived up in the willows, had set up her house in the willows, and was all cozy with her friends. And Frog came by to visit one day, and Toad invites her in and says, Becky, come in. And so Frog comes in, and Frog looks around, looks at the willows, and so they have something to eat together, and they visit for a little bit. And finally Frog says to Toad, says, you're going to die. Toad says, what? He says, she points her chin over there. She points with her chin over to the creek. Says, when the rains come, that creek is going to rise up, and you're going to drown. So Toad thinks about that, Horned Toad. So the next day, then she moves her family further up on the hilltop, where they're safe, where the flood won't get to them. So then the next day, or a few days later, then Frog comes along and says, my friend, let's go picking berries. We'll go berry picking. And Toad says, all right. And so they're best friends, and they got their arms, and they're walking along, and they're going to go. And Toad just runs at the mouth constantly. And Frog, and so Toad finally says, hey, he says, you're not listening to me. And Frog says, oh, yes, I am. And Toad puffs up and gets really big and fierce looking. Frog says, you don't scare me. I'm not afraid of that. So they're walking and walking along to go get their berries, and it's so hot. And all of a sudden, a frog drops over, dead in the doornail, all four legs up in the air. And Toad's still jabbering along down and realize that Frog. All of a sudden she looks back and says, hey. She walks back up. And Frog's down there on the floor, all four legs up in the air. So Toad kicks her, no response. She looks at her again, kicks her again. No response. Oh, you stupid old frog, I guess you died. Says, here's what you get. And spits on Frog. And Frog gets that moisture, and she rubs it into her skin. Oh, I was so hot and dry. Thank you so much. Now I'm fine. Thank you, my dear friend. And so the lesson in this, there is a lesson. One of the lessons, and I took that lesson, it helped me, because the medicine man that I was working with, the Ute shaman, we were down working with the World Council of Elders, down, I think it was in Guatemala. And I had 6 brothers. I'm the only girl in that group. My older sister was 12 and 15 years older than I, so I really didn't know them because of foster homes and everything. So with all those brothers, you either learn to sink or swim or sink, so I learned to stick up for myself and speak up. So we're going on, and the shaman, he's telling me about this and what our work should be and everything. And of course, I have an opinion. So I go, well, why don't we do it this way? We could do it this way. We could do this, and we could make this happen. I was all excited about it, and he got real quiet. We're in the bus with all the other elders. we're going along the cliffside, where there's a cliff up this way, and then there's a drop off down the other way. So he got real quiet, and then he says, how do you say in Spanish? Because I was translating for him. My Spanish is pretty rusty now. I'm not as good as it was. But he says, how do you say, I want to present this to you? And there's that big volcano. There's a lot of volcanoes down in Guatemala. There's a big volcano going. And I said, let me see. Me gusta presentarle esto. And so he says, so he practiced it. And so then he stands up and he pantomimes picking me up. And then he says that phrase to the volcano. He says, I'm throwing you into the volcano so it won't erupt. This is going to solve things. So then we get quiet and we have our discussion going a little bit more. And then I can see his arms are crossed across his chest, and he says, And he says, you know what? I'm going to give you a new name. Oh boy, he gave me my first name. I didn't know that. Sunaflamuch in the language, which means wolf woman, because wolf was my first vision quest, and it means communication. Wolf is communicator. So I go, oh boy, I get a new name? Wow. I didn't think of that. He says, yes. He says, I'm going to give you the name Tegupawat. And I'm like, Tegupawat? Do I have this right? How do you say that? And he says, yeah, Tegupawat. And I said, oh, cool, thank you, Claire. What does that mean? She who talks back. And so I'm crushed. I thought it was going to be eagle woman or white buffalo calf woman or something really, really cool. And so I thought about, and tears started to come to my eyes, going, oh, I really have so much respect for Clifford. And here I've blown it with my big mouth and my opinions. But then I thought, well, gee, it's true. I really am. I always talk back. I always have an opinion. I guess I better own it. And so I turned to Clifford and I said, yeah, you're right, Clifford. I am Tegupawat. That's a good name for me. He said, no, that's a terrible name. Nobody's going to like you. And I'm going, oh, yes, I love it. Clifford, that's me. And he got so mad his face got red. He wouldn't talk to me the rest of the trip. So that was my moment of frog and toad. If you get somebody spits on you, you just own it. And it'll bring you back to life. So thank you all. And it's a pleasure to be here. And thank again, Don Cisco.
Okay, next up, we have Sage Vogel. Sage is a lifelong storyteller and bilingual wordsmith. He's the author of the short story collection Dichos en Nichos, published by UNM Press, and the underground magical realism epic El Ocio. He's based in northern New Mexico and resides in a compound of melting adobe ruins called Babylonia, which is under perpetual reconstruction. His debut story collection invites readers into the heart of a proverbial 1950s northern New Mexico village, where the fruit orchards, arroyo roads, adobe homes, and even pigsties hold tales of wit, romance, woe, and wisdom. Dichos en Nichos contains 10 interconnected stories inspired by original dichos, pithy folk sayings and proverbs. Vogel's dichos, presented in Spanish and English, are shared among a colorful cast of characters. The dichos offer guidance, caution, and comfort as the townsfolk navigate themes of identity, community, loss, and love. From tales of sacrifice and survival to those of intimacy and independence, each story is a testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Sage Vogel.
sitting in the back with the cool kids. What an honor to be here in such a good company. I think this event is just a few years younger than me. It's great. We're getting good sound just at this level. All right. So I'll be reading from my book tonight, Dichos and Nichos. And if anybody loves what they hear, I'll be in the back later and you can grab one, okay? I'll get right into it. This first excerpt is from the story Bien Pedo. Now, how many people in here know what bien pedo means? Does anyone want to share? How about you? Really drunk. Bien pedo. So all my stories have a Spanish title and an English title. So we got bien pedo, dirty, stinking drunk. I'm going to ask you on the dichos too. When I say a dicho, I'll read it in Spanish and then we'll take see if anyone in the crowd picks up on it, okay? So here we go. Oye, Primitivo, despierta. Viejo, no puedes dormir aquí. Señor Vaca, don't waste your time. He can't hear you. Está asustado, look at him. We can't just leave him here all tirado en el trochil. You want to put him in your bed? They won't let him into mass later. Well, he went today, and I'm not touching him. Let him sleep. Pobrecito. Como nuestra abuela solía decir, el que con cerdo se acuesta, apesta. Anybody? You got it? You want to share?
He who sleeps with pigs stinks.
He who sleeps with pigs stinks. So this is the kind of wisdom that's hidden in this book. Okay? That's not how it goes. And have some respeto. He's still an elder. He's a borracho perdido. Un borrachales. Un parrandero. Así vuelao. Anda poeta. What else? Tomisto. Todo pisto. Bien pedote. Dirty, stinking drunk. This smell makes me sick. Let's go before it sticks to us too. Through his closed eyelids, Primitivo listened to the departing footsteps of the two young men that he recognized by their voices alone. When they'd gone, he cracked his eyes open. Dawn had not yet broken, and there was a chilled breeze blowing. Todavía no, not yet, Primitivo muttered, closing his eyes again. Demasiado temprano y fresco. Too early and too fresh. I'll stop there, okay? Go to the next one. That one was nice and lighthearted. I'm going to read another one. This is in the middle of a story called El Intercambio, which means the exchange. This conversation happens between a very old woman, older than you'd guess, older than any of you here by far, and a very young woman, a little girl. And I'm going to start with the dicho and I'll end with the dicho. Vivimos la muerte más de una vez. Anybody? We live death more than once. So this was spoken out loud. Vivimos la muerte más de una vez. Emilia paused her fidgeting and looked back into Zoraida's ancient eyes. How? Zoraida put an arm around her and pointed to a cluster of yellow flowers growing across the yard with her other hand. Do you see those flowers there? Those are my favorite kind. Girasolitos is what my mother called them. Will you pick one for me and bring it here, then I will explain. Emilia nodded and ran off. She took her time selecting a flower, circling the cluster a couple of times. Zoraida watched her, marveling at the child's liveliness. Emilia finally picked a flower and came running back, presenting it to Zoraida. Gracias, mi buena niña. This is a beautiful flower, a very good choice, Zoraida told her, accepting it. She held the flower up to the sunlight, and they admired it together for a few moments. Then she took a deep breath and turned back to Emilia. I lived in this house for many, many, many years, Emilia mia. And these flowers have bloomed here every single year. I watched them grow from nothing, and I watched the flowers that came before them grow from nothing and return to nothing. I've watched hundreds and hundreds of these girasolitos bud, blossom, wither, and fall. In my one life, I witnessed thousands of their deaths. Do you see? Emilia furrowed her brow. No. Zoraida patted her head and embellished. It was the same with the people in my life. I watched my grandparents and my parents grow old and die. I watched my brothers grow up, grow old, and die. I watched my husband grow into a man, then shrink into an old man, and then die. I watched aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends all live and then die. The worst death that I suffered was the death of my only hijo, Gregorio, who died only hours after his birth. I watched his life begin and I watched it end all before dawn that day. In my one life, I had many, many deaths, and I suffered for every single one except my own. Now do you understand? Emilia nodded and looked at the ground. Zoraida knew the little girl was too young to understand, and she likely would not remember this, but she continued nonetheless. It is those that live through death that suffer for it, not those who die. Those that live on remember who they have lost, and it hurts very much. As you get older, you will live through death, jovencita, again and again. In the end, once you are dead, pues, Zoraida waved her hands in the air, dismissing anything and everything. That's it. You're dead, and you won't think of death the same way, and you will see that la vida es bella porque es bella. Anybody?
Life is beautiful because it is.
Life is beautiful because it's ugly. Okay, I got one more for you just so we don't end on that mood, okay? Okay, this is from a story called El Coyote y el Cuervo, the Coyote and the Crow. It starts with dialogue. And the dialogue's a little sad at first, but it'll switch up pretty quickly. I'm sorry about your brother. Siento mucho tu pesar, Primitivo. Has anyone ever heard someone say the word mucho instead of mucho? Around here, some of the old timers, you'll hear people around here say mucho instead of just mucho. I don't know why, and I don't really want to know why, actually. I just love it anyway. Siento mucho tu pesar, Primitivo. Gracias. He was a good man. Mejor que yo. A far better man than I've ever been. Oh, cállate. There's no reason to say such things. It's not like you, and I don't like it. There are plenty of reasons to speak the truth, Alcarita. Sí que hay. But I'm not sure that's true, tonto. It's true. Segundino had a wife. He owned a home and good land. He worked hard all his life. Y yo qué? The only reason he died before me is because I pickled myself with alcohol. Alcarita laughed at that. Then she sighed, shook her head, shrugged, and began to get out of bed. ¿Qué sé yo? She said. If you want to feel bad, go ahead, but I'm not going to listen to you. Grief is one thing. I can tolerate grief. Self-pity es otra cosa, and it stinks, and I won't have it in my house, and definitely not in my bed. I'm too old for such nonsense, and it's getting late. You should go soon. No, let's stay here a little longer, Primitivo said, pulling Alcarita's arm so she fell back into the bed again. Tienes razón, quédate conmigo, just a little while longer. Fine, she said, giving in. Primitivo pulled Alcarita close again and brushed a strand of her silver hair behind her ear. Then he kissed her cheek. You smell like the Rio, she said, looking up at him but not pulling away. You ever been told that? You smell like the Rio. And what were you doing stomping through my flores this morning? And Oralia told me she saw you running through the town naked before Mass. Is that true? Dime la verdad. Primitivo put his head against the backboard and closed his eyes. He whispered, Muerte a la mentira, verdad de por vida. Sounds a little more esoteric. Anybody?
Say it again.
Muerte a la mentira, verdad de por vida.
Death to life, truth to life.
Pretty much, yeah. Death to lies, truth is life. Or truth forever. Verdad de por vida. Like I'm going to be true for my whole life, basically. Qué bonito. Ahora, dime. Primitivo took a deep breath. I had to run from a cerdo celoso twice this morning. He saw me with his marrana. Alcarita's eyes widened. Primitivo, she said, stretching his name. Tell me you didn't come to my bed after laying desnudo with a pig. I wasn't naked with the pig. El cochino found me again, luego, bañando en el río, taking a bath in the river. You ever done that? Taking a bath in the river. So see, I had to run en peloto. Desvestido. Are Aren't you embarrassed to be out in Cuerao just tanning your leathers in the sun? ¡Qué vergüenza! Ya me relajé todo. I just relaxed about everything. It's fine. Y dime, why were you with the pigs vieja? Turning that poor cerdo into a cabrón. Guácala. Is that why your clothes are en zoquetao? I woke up there after el velorio. He saw me. Y no. I washed mi ropa en el río, but that niño mofoso threw dirt on me. Didn't you see? ¿No viste? Alcarita growled and got out of bed before Primitivo could stop her again. I have to wash my sheets every time you come over, she said. Do I have time to read a little more? Okay, I'll keep going just a little bit. One more page. Primitivo sat up. Alcarita, espera. She walked around his clothes on the floor. I'm not washing those rags. If you wear clothes that have been tainted by filth, así, the duendes will come to molestarte. I have an old suit you can wear, one of Frutoso's. Frutoso was Alcarita's late husband. He had died over 20 years ago. His name reminded Primitivo of his own predicament. Alcarita, algo me pasó, he decided to say. That what? What do you mean? ¿Qué dices, Primitivo? Creo que ahorita llega mi hora. Death comes for me, soon. Alcarita stamped her foot on the wood floor and snapped her fingers. Basta, she snapped, enough. Do not summon death to my bed, Primitivo Vaca. It is bad enough that you trapped un en mierda de y lástima. Don't bring la muerte into it too. Up, get up, levántate. She punctuated her command with light claps. Primitivo held his hands up and tried to explain. Alcarita, escúchame. Siento que algo se rompió en mi corazón. Something broke in my heart this morning. It started at the funeral yesterday, but fleeing that cerdo del diablo, especially la segunda vez, that's what did it. Y la botella, she said. Your drinking doesn't help. She crossed her arms. Entonces, ¿qué? ¿Veniste a mi cama para besos de despedida? Did you come to my bed for goodbye kisses? Dying men don't do what you just did with me. Primitivo hung his head and shrugged. He had no excuse or explanation. Y esta no es la primera vez, Alcarita. This isn't the first time you told me this. Recuerda, you told me the same thing 10 years ago. You swore death was knocking at your door, so you came and hid in my bed then too. I was wrong. This time, esta vez es diferente. ¿Y cómo sabes? Hoy, puerta cerrada por la suerte. Mañana, otra llamada de la muerte. Today, luck locked the door. Tomorrow, death calls once more. ¿Estás loco? Sí, estás loco. Y yo estoy loca. Alcarita turned away, shaking her head. Alcarita, no. Primitivo waited. Their eyes met. Alcarita searched his features for the truth and saw telltale signs of it. She sat back down on the bed. Then she lay next to Primitivo again, covering them both with the sheet. She moved closer to him and put her hand over his. I don't mind that you smell like the river. It reminds me of being young, and so does being in bed with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Nice to meet you all.
Nice job.
Safe as a tall guy.
Our next storyteller is Eldrena Duma. Grew up in New Mexico and Arizona among the Pueblo tribes of the Laguna, Tewa, and Hopi. She's a member of the Storytellers of New Mexico and travels widely to tell stories and teach workshops offering captivating stories and a variety of recorded music and historical accounts from Native American tribes.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to push this down. Can you push this down just a little bit? Just a little bit. Yeah, I can't see people. Right? There you go. There you go. Yeah, I try not to touch them because they'll fall down. Well, I am really excited to be here. Thank you for everything. Your stories were wonderful. I grew up in Winslow, Arizona. That was where I was born. And I was actually on that corner standing. From a little girl on up until. But so my life started there. It was a wonderful time in the world. And I did not know what I know today. And as a storyteller, it's just wonderful to discover and research the past, especially when it has to do with you. Do you remember a time when people would make agreements with one another just by shaking their hand, and that was good enough? We didn't have to have a contract or a notary to tell that our words were what they were and that they were true and honorable. Well, a long time ago, in about 1880, when the Atlantic Pacific Railroad was coming through into New Mexico, they thought they could just come right through on the way to the West Coast until they were told, oh no, if you're going to come through New Mexico, there's some tribes that you have to consider and talk to in order to go through the land. And so they did not understand that. So they went ahead and they brought that to the attention of the different tribes. And some of them were not in agreement of letting the railroad come through. There were two that said, okay, the Kiowa people, the San Domingo Pueblo, and then the tribe that I come from, the Pueblo of Laguna, the Coecas. And so they kind of, San Domingo kind of told them, you can come through, but we want you to kind of be away from our Pueblo. Laguna, on the other hand, because they were going to be coming through Albuquerque, there was not a way that they could actually really get around our Pueblo. They kind of had to go right through it. And at the very beginning, the track went right around our mother village, Laguna, on to the west. But there was an agreement that took place, and it was called the Flower of Friendship, and it was just a handshake. And the agreement was that we would allow you to come through our land, and we will give you the water that you will need for your railroad. In exchange, we would like for you to employ our tribal members. And so it was agreed upon. And from that day on, about every year, until just not too long ago, they always gathered together and they called it the watering of the flower. And the agreement was once again spoken and they agreed upon it. And so eventually back, I think it was about 1887, when the Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe bought out Atlantic Pacific. And so they kept that agreement going and they continued to water the flower. Now, I say that because those were stories that were told to me without the dates. Dates really didn't matter sometimes to our people. It was just the event that took place. And so that was how I knew that my family, how they ended up in Arizona in Winslow. My grandfather was one of the people that were hired on with the Santa Fe Railroad. And so when a lot of the Laguna men were going west, they established colonies along the way. And that's where their employees, the different Laguna men, they were held in these different colonies throughout the rail line. Winslow being one, on into California like Barstow and Richmond. And so they established the kind of like a Laguna satellite village. Everything that took place in the mother village was now taking place in these colonies. They would even elect their own governors and village officials, just like they did back home. The language continued on. The ceremonies continued on. The dancing continued on. Everything that was done back in the mother village in New Mexico was done throughout Arizona into California. And that was how the people stayed in touch with their tribe.
And the officials in Laguna, whenever they had a meeting, they would go ahead and pass on the information that was decided upon to the officials. But if you had a governor of each one of them, if that governor could, he would travel back to the mother village to attend the meeting and then take all that information back to the colonies. Now, I tell you that story today because when you go back to Winslow, you will not see any evidence that a colony was even there. Because when Burlington Northern came in, my uncle was one of the last of the workers. And when he retired, they waited for him to retire and another person, and then they came in and they bulldozed everything down. I took my aunt and my mom there when we were coming back from Flagstaff. I said, do you want to go by Winslow and kind of see what is left behind of the colony? And they said, sure, we haven't been there in a while. Now the gate was still there. The chain link fence was still up, but it was open. It wasn't locked. So we drove on in and we looked around and it was flat. There was the tracks there and they were concrete slabs. And my mom and I got out. My aunt said, I'll just stay here. She had just lost her oldest daughter not too long before. And so coming through Winslow was bringing back those memories because my aunt lived right there at the colony and raised her family there. And my mom was raised there also. And so as Mom and I got out, we started to look. I said, oh, Mom, look, that a concrete slab right there. Wasn't that where the community bathrooms were and where the women went and did their hair and laundry and all that? She goes, yeah. And over here was kind of the community building where we would gather for potlucks and everything. I said, Mom, I remember a big cottonwood tree and right there where they created kind of like a makeshift plaza so that we could have our dances. And over there, I remember the bread ovens that would be lined up. And there were rows and rows and rows, about 4 rows, I think it was about 4 rows of kind of housing that they had made out of the railroad cars. They lined them up side by side. And in between the space, they went ahead and built kind of a room to connect each one of those box cars. And so when you walked in, like say, for instance, my grandmother's house was a little bit different than the others. And so when you would walk into my aunt's, you would go in the front door and there was like a little tiny living room with a little wall, and it had a bookshelf that you could see into the room beyond, and they made that into their kitchen and dining room. And then the boxcar was actually, the doors were taken off, and then they made these big wooden closets that were kind of the room dividers. So you really didn't have any privacy. And so they kind of used those, and you could have like 3 bedrooms or 3 rooms designated for your family. And the community bathroom, everyone had an opportunity every month. There was a family that was chosen on the women's side and the men's side, and you would go and clean it up. You'd clean the commodes, you'd mop and clean it up really good, and then go into where the bathtubs were and the showers, and you had to really clean the pallets that they had there. I remembered the pallets because they were very smooth from being wiped down for so long. And then when I would walk in, it always smelled clean. Those Laguna women, they wanted their bathrooms clean. And I don't know about the men. I figured that they probably took care of that too. But whenever I would go there, I remembered the whistle blowing, and we would know that the men were getting off work. My grandfather, he would always take his little lunch box. He sometimes would save some things for us because we would be greeting them as the gate opened up, and we waited for them to come out, and we would greet them, and they were very tired. Sometimes they had to go all the way into Gallup or beyond, and whatever they were doing, whatever their job was, but we knew they were tired, and so we would greet them, and they greeted us with open arms and a smile on their face, and we would go, can we carry your lunch box? And it's like, yeah, go ahead. I left you something in there. And it's like, okay, thank you. And then we would go and we would listen to their stories. And that was wonderful. And so my mom, as she started to age, she was forgetting things short term. And a lot of people, my relatives, were, you know, mom is kind of repeating herself and she's forgetting a lot of things. And I said, okay. And so whenever she would come home with me to Texas, I would just ask her all kinds of questions. And sometimes she would repeat herself and she would say to me, did I already tell you that story? And I said, probably, but tell me again. I probably forgot the details. And so she would proceed to tell me again. But one of the wonderful things that came from that time was that her mind went way back in time. I never heard those stories of her as a young girl growing up in Winslow, Arizona at the Laguna Colony. And whenever she started to tell some of those stories, I said, Mom, hold on a minute. Let me go get my notebook. And I kind of had a notebook just for those stories. And I'd say, okay, now you can start to tell me that story about, and she said, what story? And I said, and then I thought, okay, what kind of keywords can I get? And so I would say, and she goes, oh, okay, yeah. And so I said, tell it to me again, and I'm going to write it down. And so she did. I'm just going to share a few of them with you. One of the things that she said, whenever she was there growing up, she said, Dad always worked really hard, and we didn't have a lot of extra money to be spent on anything, but Dad, he kind of knew that, and every now and then he would say to us before we went to school, I'm going to get paid today. So when you children get off of school, walk over to the Coney Island and we'll get something special before we come home. And they said, okay, Dad. And she said, Dad would meet us there. Sometimes we'd get shakes, or sometimes we would get a hot dog or a corn dog or something. But that was our special treat with Dad. And she said, and sometimes us girls, we would ask permission if we could walk downtown. And this one particular time, there was 3 of us walking, and we were chit-chatting, and we saw one of the ladies from the colony coming up, and she was walking really fast, and she said, I just greeted her, and I said, hi, Blue Devil. And the lady, she said, just looked at me, and she just had this mean look on her face. She goes, Blue Devil yourself. And then she just walked right by me. And she said, I thought, oh my, she's in a bad mood. And so they continued on, but when she went back home, she told her mom about this. She said, Mom, when we were going downtown, I saw the lady that lives over here, and I said to her, I greeted her, and I said, hello, Blue Devil, and then she just got mad at me. And her mom turned around and said, Ethel May, why did you call her Blue Devil? And she said, well, isn't that her name? No, that's not her name. Well, why do people call her that? And she said, I don't know, but don't call her that. This is her name. And she said, oh, okay. No wonder she got mad at me. And so I told my mom, I said, Mom, you must have been someone just like me when I was a little girl. And so another one that I really enjoyed the most, all around here, you guys probably go piñon picking, and those are treasured times with your family and your friends. And so I remember that growing up, doing that back at Laguna. Well, Mom said that what they did, they always continue on to do what they did at Laguna, and they went up high into the mountains to go piñon picking. And she said, one day, your relatives, Amanda and them, they came by and they said, Ethel, we're going to go piñon picking this weekend. Do you want to go with us? And she said, yes. And she said, all right, we'll meet at our house and we're going to get up early. We'll pack a lunch and we'll go up into the mountains and then we'll go piñon picking and come back home. She said, all right. She was so excited. She says, I love being around Aunt Amanda because they were so funny. They laughed all the time. They had all kinds of stories to tell. And so we got there. I got to her house. We loaded up into the truck and we headed off into the mountains where the piñons were. And it was just beautiful. beautiful. And we got our blanket, we put it out underneath the trees where we were going to pick piñons, and we started shaking the trees, and the piñons would come down, and we would kind of start loading up our bags and everything, and they used the bluebird flower bags to put their piñons in. And she said Amanda was looking up into that tree, and she saw way up there were a lot of pine cones that had not fallen down, but she could see the piñons in there. So she said to her husband, honey, do you think you can climb up this tree and get way up there as far as you can and shake it? Because I think there's a lot of piñons up there. And so he said, okay. And so they helped him get to the first branch. And then he climbed up and he continued to climb some more. And she said, a little bit higher. And so he climbed and he would shake and they'd all fall down. And she said, okay, there's some more way up there. Keep going. And so he would. And Mom said, he stepped on a branch that was weak. And the next thing we know, it cracks. And here he comes, tumbling down out of that tree and hits the bottom. And we all started screaming and we gathered around him looking to make sure he was still breathing. And Amanda was shaking him, honey, are you okay? Yes, I'm okay. And after they found out that he was all right, Mama said, Amanda's sister looked at him, looked at her sister and said, well, sister, I think you got the biggest nut that fell out of the tree. And she said, we just started laughing. And so she says, I remember that story as if it was just like yesterday. And I loved that time with my mom because that was a window of time that I had never heard any of those stories before. And she gave me that glimpse into life as a young girl growing up in Winslow, Arizona at the Laguna Colony. And so my mom, when she grew up, there were 2 summers that she went to go work at the Grand Canyon because at that time they were hiring young teenagers from the area tribes. And so my mom's sister came and said, sister, they're hiring some teenagers at the Grand Canyon. You need to come back and get a job with me. And she said, oh, sister, you know Mom and them aren't going to let me go by myself. She said, but if you ask, maybe they will. And so she said, my sister asked, and they said, all right, but you better keep an eye on this one. And so she did. She says, my first job was working at the Bright Angel Lodge. I said, what did you like about that? She said, oh, I love making beds. And she said, I just love those clean sheets and cleaning and getting all the rooms cleaned up. And it was just so nice. And I just enjoyed that. But also at lunchtime, they would let us kids eat together in a table all by ourselves. And there were tribes from different ones that we got to know one another during that time. And then the next summer, she said, when I came back, they didn't put me at Bright Angel Lodge. I went to the laundromat. And I said, well, Mom, that was pretty good because you liked doing laundry. Because I remember when she was using that washboard and stuff, and it would hurt my knuckles. But she said, just go a little bit harder. And I said, Mom, I am. I'm going hard. And then when she got those wringer machines, I was so afraid to put the clothes in there because I might get my fingers stuck. And then we would kind of rinse it out. And she'd say, okay, Drina, hold one side of the pants. And they, denim pants, how stiff they can be and hard. And I was just like, probably in 7th grade or something like that. And I was holding on really tight and she would ring it and ring it and ring it. I'd say, Mom, I can't hold on. She goes, hold on. I said, I can't. And then before I knew it, I let it go and it would just spin and I'd have to do it all over again. And so Mom knew about laundry, but she said, I didn't really care for the laundry time because we didn't get time to eat together. We just kind of had to eat by ourselves. But that was the summer she met my dad. And then after that, they got married. And I asked my dad, what were some of the stories about you at the Grand Canyon? And he said, well, your mom is from the Roadrunner clan. And my mom is from the Corn Clan, but my father was from the Snake Clan. And so when I was working at the Grand Canyon, this man came up to me and started asking questions because he knew that I was Tewa and Hopi. And us Hopis, that was where we emerged from, was the Grand Canyon. And so he started asking me questions and I was answering them. And he said, Douglas, you know a lot more than most people around here about the Grand Canyon. Can you be my guide tomorrow? And he said, oh, no, that's not my job. I have to do this other things. And he goes, but I really want you. And he said, no, I don't think my supervisor would let me come and be your guide. Well, I don't know who this man was, but the next morning when Dad showed up, he was the guide for this man. And he took him all over. He talked about the people and all about the Grand Canyon and how they were related to the Hopis and what the Hopis knew about them. And then it was lunchtime. And he said, Douglas, would you like to have lunch with me? And it was at that nice lodge at the Grand Canyon. Is it El Tabar? I can't remember what it is, fancy. And he said, oh no, I can't go there to eat lunch with you. He said, why not? He said, they told us that we're not supposed to go in there. And he said, who told you? He said, well, because we work here, we're workers and we're not allowed to go into that place. And so the man said, well, hold on a minute, just wait out here and I'll be right back. And once again, I don't know who this man was, but the next thing you know, Dad's going in there to have lunch with him. Dad said, oh my goodness, when I walked in there, the tables had beautiful white cloths on them and fancy plates and forks and spoons. I don't know how many forks and spoons they need to eat. And then glasses and glasses. And he said, well, no wonder they don't want us to be in here. We probably wouldn't know how to eat with all this stuff. And then we got the menu. And he said, I could not read the menu. It had fancy words on it. And the man must have saw that in my eyes because he said, Douglas, would you like me to order for you? And he said, yes, sir, please order for me. And he did. After he was finished with his meal, he said, Douglas, what did you think about your food? And he said, oh, I don't know what I ate, but it sure is good. And the man said, well, guess. He goes, well, it kind of tasted like maybe chicken? No. Pork? No. He said, it was rattlesnake. And my dad's eyes got so big, he said, what? Oh no. And he said, Drina, I couldn't spit my food out because it was already in my stomach. But I told the man, oh no, I just ate one of my relatives. And when he was telling me that story, my Saya, his mother, my grandmother was sitting there, and she had that look of horror like she had just heard the story for the first time. She said, no, I know I ate my own relative. I don't know who it was, but he sure tastes good. And so I was blessed with a family from the Pueblo of Laguna, the Hueca people. And my father was Tewa and Hopi. And you mentioned Uye. And so the memory and everything greeted me tonight because my father, when he used to tell me about where we Tewas came from here in New Mexico, sometimes Uye was in some of the stories. And he said, I have never been there, but I've always wanted to go there, he said. And he said, you know, our men, when we get ready to do our prayer feathers, they will take them back all the way back to the place that we came from as a reminder of where we had come, and they would leave behind the prayer feathers. And he said, I've never journeyed with them, but they still do it to this day. And I still wonder if the younger generation, if they still remember that place that we came from, and if they come back all the way to New Mexico to remember the place that we came from. And so I'm getting ready to close with a story. I had a book. I did the workshop today, had a wonderful time. And man, were those people, I mean, they had some stories that were awesome. And they created those stories in less than 15 minutes. And then the independent one, we challenged ourselves to go do it in 10 minutes. And they did it. And the stories that came from that workshop just blew me away. They always do. And so I want to share with you, because I had a book I didn't bring in tonight. And this is a story about a remembrance of the time that I lived with my father and my saya back in Palaca, Arizona at First Mesa, because that's the only place the Tewas, you will find the Tewa people. And so I'm going to do this very quickly. When I went back to go live with my dad after he and my mom had divorced, I was really sad at that time. And so my mom went ahead and brought us to Laguna, but I made my way back to my father. And so she had, her second family was starting to become established, and the man she had married, he wasn't really wanting our children from my father. And so we kind of ended up going back to Arizona. And I was the one that was there with my dad. My brothers were there for a while, and then they came back to Laguna. But during the time I was there, I remembered when I first met my grandmother, she always looked very serious. And I thought, oh, I don't know if she really wants me to be here with them. But I knew nothing about her. And she was a hard worker. She was a potter. My father was a kachina doll maker. Her house was just a simple 2-roomed house. You walked in, and during the daytime, it was a living room. But at nighttime, it was the bedroom. Had a little twin bed that we used as a couch. And then at nighttime, my saya and I, we slept on the floor. We had an outhouse, and we had to go outside and fill the bucket and bring it back in for water. We heated up our water, and we took our baths in a galvanized tub. Any of you guys remember those days? And I was usually the last one to take a bath, because the dirtiest one was always the last one, and I was always dirty. And so Dad would get it ready. We would do it at nighttime, and I'd say, Dad, put some towels or blankets on that window and on this window. And he had a curtain that would close the door. And he says, Astrina, just leave the lights off. No one will see you. Yeah, they will. Somebody will come in and look at me like this way. And he said, put something on. So he was always covering the windows for me. And so my saya, I found out, was actually the life of the party. And so there were several incidences. She won the best costume at Halloween. We didn't even know she was there, because she was part of the decoration in the corner as a scarecrow. And I thought, what? And so I was learning all these wonderful things about my grandma. And then one day, one of the missionary women came knocking at our door asking for saya, and said, come on in. And they said, Saya, Nelly, I was told that you normally are the Santa Claus for the children. And I'm going, what? She's Santa Claus for the children. And so I came to ask you if you could be Santa Claus again this year. And Saya said, well, I've been doing it for some time now. Maybe you should give somebody else a chance to be Santa Claus. And I'm going, no. To see you as Santa Claus. And so the lady said, okay, I'll go see if we can find somebody. And so they didn't, because the men did not want to be dressed up as a Santa Claus. And so Saya said, okay, I'll do it. So the time got near. She was getting her things ready. She got her long socks and asked my dad if she could use his long johns and his thermal shirt and everything. Now, all this stuff was like, you know, my saya never wore pants. And so she always made her dresses, and she wore her kids' shoes with those nude color cotton stockings that they wore. And that was how she put her hair, never let it down except when she was going to bed. And so I was used to seeing her in a certain way. And then for her to transition into Santa Claus with the pants and everything, the beard, the hat, everything. She was getting it all ready, and I could just imagine what it was going to be like. And so finally the time came. My dad said, Drina, you go with Saya because it's starting to drizzle, and you have to walk up on top of the trail, and there's some slippery rocks. I don't want her to fall down. I'll meet you guys later. I said, okay. So Saya and I got up there, and there was a little trailer that she could dress in, and I looked at her. I said, oh, goodness. I could hardly wait for my friends that were already inside the building waiting for Santa Claus to show up. And so we walked out of that little trailer, and as we got to the front door, getting ready to go in, around the corner came another Santa Claus. And I said, oh no, there's two Santa Clauses. They had finally convinced the relative to dress up, and they had a Santa Claus suit for him to put on. And I know it took forever to convince him to do it. And so I thought, oh no, they're going to pick him, and I'm not going to get to see my Saya as Santa Claus. But my Saya was a quick thinker. She said, hold on, don't go in without me. Trina, come on. Sister Kay, let's go. And we went back into the trailer. She went ahead and undid her belt, and that pillow that was her big belly, she moved it up and sucked it. And I said, oh, Saya, you got like big, well, I'm Santa Claus' wife. And I said, yeah, but how about your pants? You don't have a dress. Well, it's cold up there. I'm not going to be riding in the sleigh up there in the cold. I need pants on. And then she took her beard off. She goes, I don't know how men wear that hair on their face to just hate you, she said. And then she asked the lady, can I have some of that stuff that you put on your lips that looks like blood? And the lady said, lipstick? Yes. And so she had red lipstick, and she put it here. She added a little bit to her cheeks, and she said, okay, let's go. And she kept her hat on, and we went out. The man looked at her, and he knew her, and he just kind of shook her head and laughed, and they waited, and I walked in. I went to the front where all the kids were, and you could hear the bells. And they said, kids, take a seat. Someone's here. You know, and all of a sudden the doors open up, and there comes two Santa Clauses, is what people thought. And they all thought, two Santa Clauses? And until my Saya spoke up. The man was so shy, he didn't even say anything. He was probably so embarrassed. And Saya said, well, hello there, everybody. How are you doing today? Me and my husband came from way far away up north. And I told my husband, this year, honey, I'm going to go with you. I'll drive the sleigh because your eyesight is getting really bad. And I don't know where you're going to end up. So I'll go with you. And can I borrow some of your pants? It's skinny. He's just big. I had to wear this belt on to keep my pants up because it's cold up there. Now, this time, everybody's laughing. They know that this is my Saya. And I am just in awe. The kids are like, Santa Claus. And so the reason why they had Santa Claus is they brought in a big tree, and underneath the people could bring presents for their families. And so after all of that took place, one by one, the presents were given out. I knew I wasn't going to get a present because my dad and my Saya didn't have a lot of money. And so I just sat there, and I was going to enjoy my friends. And there was one little box under there. Santa Claus lady was going under and got it. And she said, is there a young girl, little girl by the name of Eldrina? And I was not expecting anything, so I was just in awe of all my friends. And they said, Drina, she's calling your name. What? She said, Eldrina, she has a gift. I said, and so she came up, she goes, oh, you must have been a nice girl. She winked at me, gave it to me. I thought, what could I have gotten? And so as I watched everybody open, I finally started to undo mine, and I said, my favorite chocolate-covered candy. And I opened it up, and there it was. And then I remembered the words of my Saya and my dad, always share. And I said, would you like some? Oh, yeah, that's my favorite. And they took it and I thought, would you like some? I said, no, I got some candy. I said, okay, good. And you know, you bit into them. And when you're not one that gets candy all the time, just that cherry inside with the syrup, and it's kind of comes down your chin. Oh, it's just so good. Now, they don't make them like they did back then, because I remember them being really good. But every year, one of my family members gives me a box of chocolate-covered cherries. And that's the story of my saya and the chocolate-covered cherries that I received when I was a young girl. And so the railroad kind of full circle brought my family to Winslow. My mom met my dad, and then I met the most wonderful woman in the world, my saya Nellie, who was the daughter of Nempeo, who is known in the art world of bringing and reviving the Hopi pottery to what it is today. Thank you very much.
You guys want to stand up and stretch for a second? Okay, do it quick. Stand up and stretch. Yeah. That was good. All right, we're closing the night out with Chuy Martinez, skilled musician and natural storyteller who has performed all over New Mexico. He grew up all over the United States as a migrant farm worker and became part of the United Farm Workers Union. Chuy was inspired by the work of Cesar Chavez and the work they were doing in the late 1960s and 70s. Mexican-American civil rights activists struggled for change. The Chicano movement called itself La Causa, the cause, and was most active in New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, and California. Chuy Martinez brings the music and history alive in the stirring songs learned in migrant camps and meetings. And we are very, very fortunate to have such a profound individual dedicated to preserving our ancestors' memory and the values that we hold so deeply. Chuy.
I did perform twice. Wow. Okay, and very quickly I'll share a couple of songs for you, or with you. Well, my first part was, of course, some of the migrant songs, but this ones are more contemporary from the 1800s. This is a story that I did the music for a play that I don't know if any of you remember the great Tony Mares, who was a storyteller, poet, and he wrote a play of a woman. It was one of the owners of the most famous bar at the in Old Town. Her name was Lola. Lola was the madame of the place. You know, the place was frequented by politicians, by well, you know, many influential people, a lot of wealthy, influential people, including the priest at there, San Felipe de Neri's church, right across from there, from where she had a bar. His name was a French priest. His name was Father Hornet, but they call him Father Horny. Anyway, Lola is remembering live on her time's edge. and she's remembering how it used to be all night of partying and smoke and drinking and all that, and then in the morning of the next day, when she got up, she could smell, when they irrigate, when they water the plants. She had a lot of roses in the back, in her backyard. And there was Pedro. Pedro was the gardener. And Pedro was always whistling, and smiling, and singing to the roses. And it was such a fresh air for Laura to smell the dirt and listen to Pedro singing. And she fell in love with him. Because to her, she was the purest thing after a night of partying. So she is recounting, remembering all those days. And there's, I was honored to do the music for the play called Lola's Best Dance. Levántate, Lola, ya viene el amanecer. Te canta el ruiseñor. ¿Recuerdas el gallo de ayer? Las fiestas de antaño. No queda ninguna flor. Mas a hoy amanece con donaire de amor. Levántate, Lola, ya viene el amanecer. Te canta el ruiseñor. ¿Recuerdas el gallo de ayer? Tiempo la soda que juntos pasamos los dos. No se me van olvidando, los llevo en el corazón. Levántate, Lola, ya viene el amanecer. Te canta el ruiseñor. ¿Recuerdas el gallo de ayer? This is probably a story for the future. As I told you, I love the music with social content. And, I wrote a song that honors, of course, the younger generation and the older generation. And I called it America. So it's a story for the future, so we can remember these times that we're going through right now. Listen to the children. world. There'll be no homeless people. There'll be no hungry people. There'll be no wars. There'll be more love. There'll be more love. If you see an old man shivering in the cold, over in a blanket, help him find a home. And if you see a child alone and confused, won't you give him comfort? He may be abused. America, listen to your people and give them hope. Give them hope. For if I could change the world, there'll be no divisions. There'll be better education. There'll be no discrimination. There'll be more love. There'll be more love. There'll be more love. There'll be more love. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Anizaro culture, as you know, there's subcultures here in Mexico. We have the dominant culture, which is the Native American and the Spanish, and then the Anglo-American. But we have the Anizaro culture, which is the mix of Spanish and natives, and then the Coyote culture, which is the mix of Anglo-Native or Anglo-Spanish. So that we have so many different subcultures that we call it. So this next song is a song when in the 18 or before even during the 1800s, when there was a lot of raids, because the Comanches had no pueblo that they could call a pueblo. That's when they were nomads around that time. They used to raid towns and people's places. And in order to replenish their warriors, they had to steal children and women so that they could replenish their warriors. So this one is called a cautiva. In New Mexico, we have, especially here in the north part of New Mexico, there's a music style called cautivas, which is the story of women that were stolen from the towns and places. This one is a cautiva from Las Vegas, New Mexico. La cautiva Marcelina ya se la llevan, ya se vaya de las ventas. La cautiva Marcelina ya se vaya a comer yegua, ya se va a comer la queta. Por eso yo no quiero en el mundo más amar, de mi querida patria me van a retirar. Por eso yo no quiero en el mundo más amar, de mi querida patria me van a retirar. La cautiva Marcelina, cuando llego al ojo de agua, cuando llego al ojo de agua, volteó la cara llorando. Mataron allá a mi mamá, mataron allá a mi mamá. La cautiva Marcelina, cuando llego al arbolito, cuando llego al arbolito, volteó la cara llorando. Mataron a mi hermanito, mataron a mi hermanito. Por eso ya no quiero en el mundo más amar, que mi querida patria me van a retirar. Por eso yo no quiero en el mundo más amar, que mi querida patria me van a retirar. Good friend who just passed, Cipriano of the Hill. Many of you knew him. Cipriano was a treasure, a storyteller, musician, composer, and just a treasure here in New Mexico. We really feel his presence when we play, because we share the stage many, many times. And not only the stage, but philosophy, and we share the culture. And an honor to him and to you. Muchas gracias. And you have a wonderful story time. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Let's have a big round of applause for the volunteer ladies that brought you all that delicious food. Okay. And the storytellers, please come up so we can do some pictures. And I want to thank everybody for participating in our little event here and helping us honor our ancestry, our culture, and our friendship. Blessings to everyone. Thank you so much.